Welcome to the Kent Lap Podcast.
I heard in a podcast coming over here. I listened to part of it the other day, and I was trying to finish it. And it was a doctor. He was talking, and he's done a lot of work on because they were talking about COVID-19 and some of the racial discrepancies or inconsistencies about how it's disproportionately impacted people of color in our country.
I didn't know that.
It's crazy statistics, but
Really?
30% of those infected by the coronavirus are African American, and
they don't account for 30% of the population, correct?
no, it's about 13%. And a higher percentage have actually died from it, pushing 50, and it's almost state by state.
Pushing 50%?
Yeah, of those who have died, yes. And it's almost state by state. And he was reading off the statistics. He didn't go through every state, but 4 or 5 states. So it was like, I'm paraphrasing, but Georgia is like a state that has 16% African-American population. I think 36% of those infected were African-American, and the death rate is like 53%, I think, in the state of Georgia. And he read off 3 or 4 states that were very similar. So I guess the point I want to get back to is, in 1978, the high point of there was the closing of the income disparity, where by 1978, African Americans made 59 cents for every dollar that the white Americans made. Okay, that was the high point
In 78?
In 78, and the number today is 59 cents as well, and that figure has fluctuated 3 or 4 cents both ways from that point. So I guess one of the things that when I talk about race to people is I just make the point that African Americans, generally speaking, by numbers, make less. And the wealth disparity is much more. So it's about a dime for a dollar.
What you're talking about is income.
Yeah. So the first is just actual money coming in, but wealth is, once again, we talked about safety nets earlier. Wealth has to do with safety nets and other means of income, or that you've even, if you inherit money or all that stuff. So it's even a greater disparity. So one of the things when I talk about race, I say, African Americans generally are less educated, make less money, have less wealth. They have poorer health care. I mean, you can go down all down the line with, all these kind of fundamental things that we think are important, whether it's with your own children, how you want to raise your family. And African Americans have it worse off than white Americans in almost all these categories, generally speaking, as we look at the pot. And so my point is, why is that the case? We can look at a couple. We can say a couple. Generally, we can say, you can say they're just not as smart, or they don't work as hard, or I don't believe those things are true. I think it's because of a lot of it has to do with our history. And so, the motto for my class is race matters. I think it does matter. People say, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see race. I understand what you mean. Okay.
Right.
I get that. But, God made us. This is how he made us.
Yeah.
My gender, my race, my whatever, my job might not be the most important thing, but they're still important. And we should never minimize that. So race matters. And the parable of the Good Samaritan is a great example of that. Jesus told a story that did not happen. Okay. In one sense, it happened all the time. It's a story. He could have made anybody the hero of the story. He's making the names up. He could have said a dude, and he made a Samaritan the hero. Okay. They didn't have a different skin color, but it was a different race and different culture. And he's making a really profound point in that story. And that's one of the things that I talk about when we talk about race. So race matters. The second part of the motto is history. Our history matters. It matters, where we've come from. Our history does impact our present, and it will impact our future. We're not always defined by it, and we can grow from it, and positive things can come from it, but our history matters. And I think all those disparities that we see have to do with our history, which is also linked to our race.
Yes.
And the third part of the motto for me is that Jesus matters. I think Jesus can speak to all those things. And so to me, when I talk about, even as people want to talk about how all the laws are equal, and they'll even say, I don't believe this is always true, but all the opportunities are equal today. Things have gotten better, but we still have all these disparities, all these gaps. You've heard it over and over about church being segregated and churches being segregated, and where we live, we're segregated, and even how we work. And I just don't think that's how God wanted it to be.
Yeah.
That's not the image we have of heaven in Revelation.
Yes,
either.
absolutely.